Hey everybody, and welcome to The Truth About Dyslexia. In today's episode, I have the amazing Mike Stiles. We've tried to record this podcast at least twice before this, and the wonderful world of technology has never played ball. But in today's episode, Mike, who I'll let him introduce a bit about himself, he knows more about his experience than I do, but he's been around in the dyslexia field in New Zealand for many years. And I've seen him speak on stage. I've seen him in he's been helping. And today we're going to be talking about a variety of topics around dyslexia. And we're going to start off with a bit around AI, careers, there's a lot of dyslexics out there wondering these deep, dark questions about, is AI going to help or hinder us? But I think before we get into that, Mike, do you want to tell the listeners just a little bit about your history and how you got into the world of helping dyslexics?
Yes, certainly. Thanks very much, Stephen. I spent a large chunk of my time as a secondary educator, also spent some time in the commercial world. But when I was teaching, of course, dyslexia wasn't acknowledged, and any parent that came along to school and said, my child has dyslexia, they would be quietly and subtly dismissed out of hand, because at that stage, overriding belief in the education system was that dyslexia wasn't a thing. That was back in the last century, of course. We've gone on to a new century now, Stephen. I think that's quite useful to know, in a new century. And anyway, I moved out of secondary education into a interesting side shoot, which was adults with low literacy and numeracy and how to help them in the workplace. And after being in that field for a wee while, I realized that actually many of the people that couldn't read, write or spell well did, in fact, I'd learnt a little bit about dyslexia, and they did actually have dyslexia, but it was undiagnosed, unrecognised and unsupported. And so I got a job working for the primary industry training organisation. I realised there's a lot of young people in that sector who struggled to engage with the learning. Because one of the things now, a generation or two ago, you could get into the workplace and you could get by without much in the way of literacy and numeracy. So my brother has dyslexia. He had quite a good career doing all sorts of hands-on school tasks, and he was very good at them. But of course now it's changed in that regard, and text becomes a bigger part of most people's jobs. So I was working in the primary sector, discovered that dyslexia was a thing. I was able, very fortunately, to do some research projects around it and report on those research projects. And then my sort of second career as a dyslexia guy took off at that stage. I was a little bit cheeky and I arranged to present those findings overseas at conferences, and then it blossomed from there because there was an empty field. Now, there's a saying, Stephen, that in the world of the blind, the one-eyed man is king or the one-eyed woman is queen. And that applies very much in the world of dyslexia in New Zealand, in that there's not a lot known about it. So me, having done some research projects and other things, I've sort of become, it would be ridiculous to say an authority, but I'm kind of well respected in the area because there's not a lot else out there. And so I've been able to do some exciting things, and that's where I find myself now. And I've used a screening tool to identify people with dyslexia. And so I've got to a stage now where I work every day on this. Now, you talked about AI and the new technology up there. And I think this is very interesting for people with dyslexia, because it's my belief that the people whose jobs are most likely to be overtaken by AI and the related kinds of technology are not the people that are skilled, that are dyslexic, because of course they think differently and they are often very creative and innovative, thinking out of the box. And I think that those people in many ways are the last people to be replaced by AI, because of course so long as they're confident enough to realize that actually they may struggle with reading, writing and spelling, but by the way, they think differently and oftentimes much more creatively than your average AI bit of technology can do. So I think that many of the skills and talents that neurodiverse people have are not likely to be easily replaced. Sorry.
I'm really with you, Mike. And I think this is what I'd love to chat a bit more about with you today, is because I think, as you mentioned there, dyslexics are wired differently. Like I don't like to think about it too scientifically, but if you think about dyslexia and the fact that your brain struggles with certain things, and what it's done is it's rewired some of those power sources into other parts of your brain to make them stronger. And those stronger pieces are actually ones that if you have confidence in those pieces, can use AI for the betterment of yourself and potentially the world. Because this is the thing we're looking at AI at the moment. I use it every day. It is like my best friend at the moment, and I love it, but it's like, it's still not creative. Like, it doesn't matter how much I try. It can definitely give me ideas to help me be more creative. I can ask it the right questions. It can do the research that I desperately need and would bore me to tears, but it doesn't really think outside the box yet. Who knows if that's coming in 3, 4, 5 years? They keep thinking about that, but again, who knows? Like they talked about AI for about 50 years before it arrived. So you've got no idea if they're going to show up with this next year or in 25 years. So I think there's a real position here for the dyslexic thinkers, and especially in, I guess, jobs that are best suited for dyslexics. Would you agree with that kind of thinking, Mike?
Absolutely, man. I'm not a big LinkedIn fan, but I know on LinkedIn they have a new work category called dyslexic thinking skills. And I think that's very important. And a lot of people I know who are very seriously dyslexic are actually really, really good with technology. So you ought not to make the quantum leap that if someone's dyslexic, they're not good at technology, because many of the people that I talk to with dyslexia, and I would dare to mention, Stephen, you're probably in this space yourself, that you've adapted to technology very, very well. Obviously, multiple times better at it than I am, Stephen, just saying. Anyway, and the biggest issue for people with dyslexia to overcome, I believe, is mindset. And not only for them, but for their families, for their educators, sometimes for their bosses. They need to get the right mindset that actually people with dyslexia think differently, not better, worse, but differently. And their brain is wired differently, not better or worse, but differently. And as a society, we need to use that. We need to use the fact that that brain is wired differently. I mean, there are some high-powered people out there saying some amazing things like no workplace can be fully productive if it doesn't engage with its neurodiverse staff. And I think slowly but surely, the commercial world is actually ahead of government agencies and government departments here, and ironically, ahead of the education world.
I'm with you, Mike, and I think this is the key for everyone listening is, and you said it really well. There's two parts to that. There's confidence that you've mentioned a couple of times, and also mindset. And, I think, I always think back to, what's made me successful is I was lucky. I had the dyslexic mother who pushed me and loved me, whatever I did. And then I had the father who did the opposite. So I was pushed and pulled. And so it was a really interesting mixture. But I really found they're kind of looking after myself and building my own self-confidence really young, like looking at how can I work on my mindset? Because, forever I tried everything from NLP to hypnosis to all of the different tactics to work with my brain to get the most out of it. And, that alone, and I can't speak highly enough to this. If you are young, if you're thinking about what your career is the one thing you take through your whole life is yourself. And what you do with your brain and what you work on in your brain will be with you forever. It doesn't matter if you go bankrupt, doesn't matter if you lose it all, have to restart again. Whatever you do with your mind is priceless. Invest in audiobooks, invest in listening to podcasts. I listen to 1 hour to 2 hours of podcasts a day when I go for my walks on all different topics, audiobooks, the works. And they're on things from AI to dyslexia to ADHD. I'm listening to ADHD with Dr. Daniel Amen. If you've ever listened to his work, it's amazing. And it's giving me just by listening to that a couple of hours a day, it's working on my brain. It's giving it new perspectives. And then when I can apply that and work with AI to kind of 10x my output, which is what I find AI helps me the most with, it makes me superhuman, especially at this period of the AI cycle.
Yes. And I suppose the message for everybody out there is the assistive technologies that exist now really serve to level the playing field. They enable people like yourself to fully develop your skills and talents. There's so much, and it's increasing all the time. It's also getting comparatively less expensive over time. So there is amazing technology out there. You could spend a whole day exploring the wide range of assistive technologies out there that make a really big difference. I know that T. Pukinger, for example, is recommending a software package called Help a Bird that does a lot of things around voice to text and text to voice. I do think our government departments, by the way, are a little bit behind the game here. I think that they are a big stumbling block for people who are neurodiverse dyslexic. And I think that they need to up their game. They need to have facilities whereby people can highlight a passage of text like you can do on a computer, but do it on a government website. I think it's ironic, for example, a woman with dyslexia spoke to me recently. She said, I tried to go onto the IRD website because I'd had tax issues, and she said it was such a nightmare, I had to give up. Well, that's kind of counterproductive.
That's like our IRS for the US listeners. It's our IRS, and government websites are shocking, right? They're absolutely terrible. And I think this is the key, is that with AI, it's going to be a different interface for people. People have to think about it as it's reshaping the internet. It's reshaping browsers. You know, you're going to get to a point where ChatGPT and similar products are going to be nearly fully voice operated. And you're going to be able to go into it and say, I need you to look at the IRD look at the tax website. I need you to find my tax returns for the last 3 years. Can you tell me how much I paid over those 3 years? And it'll just do it.
Yes.
It's going to be that brain changing that if your brain operates quickly, visually, spatially, and can see that the flow of how things work, you're going to have this like superhuman assistant that's going to be able to do the things. And I think that's maybe 5 years away, not even that, maybe 2 to 5 years away. It's already starting to happen. It's quite scary and amazing all at the same time, right?
You see, I think the big ongoing worry, Stephen, about people with dyslexia, and these may or may not be the people watching this podcast, is that there is the ongoing risk that people with dyslexia somehow get separated from the mainstream. So they don't do well at school. Many of them drop out of school early. They've got a fixed mindset. I can only do this kind of job because of my dyslexia. Or even many of them don't even know they have dyslexia. And so they think, and I hate using these terms, but there's no other way. They feel internally that they're thick and stupid, and they're not. They've been shortchanged by society in a really big way. And if there are people out here who are parents and or grandparents, these are the people that should be thinking about, well, actually, they need to be the people that build up the confidence of their children and or grandchildren to actually make a difference. I find, by the way, one of the most committed audiences to working in this space is grandparents who are old enough to be wise. They've often got a little bit of discretionary income. They can see their grandchildren through different eyes, because, of course, they are older and they're not so busy with the day-to-day stuff. They can sort of helicopter view about their grandchildren. Sorry, we've got on for a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think, I think as you're saying this as well, I think, talking about jobs and AI, there are definitely a lot of people out there who feel silly, feel stupid. There's also a lot of people out there trying to decide, what do they want to do? What do they want to do for their first career, their second career? If you're dyslexic, maybe it's your 8th career. There's so many of us thinking, what do we do? And like I've heard this conversation recently is everyone 10 years, 15 years ago was told to get into IT or into computer. That's the future. And now people are saying with AI, that's actually potentially going to, that whole industry, 75, 80% might be wiped off the top of that in the next 5 to 10 years, just due to technology. And so I've had a lot of people say, okay, what should I do? What should I focus on? And, me personally, I think things around, personal connection, people are going to have more free time than ever. People are still going to want to interact with other humans. So what can you do? Running events for people who run bars that are really good, different things that bring people out. The second one as well that I've heard recently is, and I do think this will change maybe in 20, 30 years, is the trades. I still think tradies. And what I mean by that is builders, renovators, people who dyslexics are usually amazing with their hands. Those people are going to have jobs for a very long time because, to be honest, the world doesn't have the resource to replace us all with robots too quickly. It'll take a while before they replace us all with robots. Sadly, it's not an overnight thing. So, if you are getting into like a dyslexic who can think bigger about building a business has the benefits of AI to help them with the admin and the detail that they didn't used to have, the ChatGPT to do the bits that they were terrible at, but they're also great at the hands-on building, the spatial awareness, the thinking, so those are a few jobs that come to mind. I think that, if someone's got a passion for them or someone likes working with their hands, lean into it and be the best you can be. Are there any careers you're seeing out there that you think are really going to be good in the future?
Well, first of all, you've highlighted the key around the trades. A lot of the people I work with are tradespeople, and they're very, very clever. I think it's interesting that I put them through a screening tool to identify not only whether or not they have dyslexia, but what their comparative suite of skills are versus their comparative suite of challenges. And almost without exception, these people are incredibly good with their hands. I think that it will, as you say, it'll be a long time before the trades are replaced. I think there's a lot of avenues within the trades for them to use ChatGPT. There used to be a saying in the dyslexia world that dyslexic people need a significant other in their life. And oftentimes, and you've mentioned your there's a hell of a lot of people out there that is either one of their parents or a grandparent or someone has become that significant other in their life. But I think in the future, AI might be the significant other that can do the things that somebody with dyslexia struggles with. And so long as someone realizes, well, actually, it's not that I'm thick and stupid. I'm really good at these things over here. I struggle with those. Oh, let's get my friend AI to do those bits over here that I struggle with.
Yeah. It's going to be game changing, right? And like we're seeing this, you think about it in engineering, I think you're going to see this in like engineering, architecture. A lot of those type of thinkers, have naturally had some dyslexic traits. I see a lot of lawyers as well who are not great at writing the paperwork, but they're brilliant at standing up in court. They've got that kind of vibe. A lot of entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs is probably the biggest faction of dyslexics because we like to do different things, and many of us, we mentioned this before, Mike, before we started the podcast, around this kind of cocktail of neurodivergent thinking that exists. Very few dyslexics are 100% dyslexia. We're not 100% vodka. There's a bit of vermouth in there. There's a bit of,
That's right.
There's a bit of all the flavors, right? And like you were mentioning, you've been looking into that a lot recently as well. And are you seeing the same thing? The crossover is remarkable. Right?
Absolutely. We're finding increasingly that dyslexia doesn't visit alone, and that many people with dyslexia have several of the other neurodiverse conditions as well. And we know that often someone with dyslexia might have a child with ADHD, but not dyslexia, or somebody with ADHD may have a child with all sorts of different cocktails within that region. And we're also learning, of course, now that ADHD people, when you're a teacher in the classroom, the most annoying thing is having an ADHD student in your class who sometimes can be a nuisance to themselves and a nuisance to everybody else. But there are many careers out there for which ADHD skills are really, really important and valuable. I think we've got a long way to go still about people in management and supervisory roles understanding around neurodiversity. I think one of the most powerful steps forward we could have would be if we could arrange some upskilling for managers and supervisors to understand neurodiversity, dyslexia, because of course they're the people that are often working in small groups with somebody dyslexic or otherwise neurodiverse in their staff. And, these people are oftentimes the people that can make the big difference in the workplace. Yeah. There's a research out of the Boston Consulting Group that says the state of California, just one state of America, the cost of undiagnosed dyslexia in the state of California, undiagnosed and unrecognized dyslexia is costing their economy $12 billion a year. Now, the Boston Consulting Group are right up there in terms of understanding it and analyzing these things. And that's a white paper they put out very recently. There are some of the other big flyers. I know Ernst Young have done some interesting work around dyslexia. I just did some work with the ASB Bank and with Air New Zealand, and slowly but surely the corporate world is beginning to understand that actually here's some, as a nation, we're talking about we need to increase productivity. And I agree with that. There's a group of people out there that can be center stage in increasing productivity if we harness the potential of our neurodiverse people in our work.
I'm so with you, Mike. And I think that exactly what I'm listening there is what I'm hearing across the board with dyslexia, ADHD. So much of societal's issues are we've tried to create the society based on neurotypical thinking, which maybe is like everyone's got different numbers for this, but maybe it's 75% of the population. But the problems come from the 25% that if we were able to look after them and hopefully AI, my belief is that at some point AI is going to help us bring all of this together. It's no longer going to be dyslexia on its own in the corner with dysgraphia, look, all of these different things are, in my opinion, the way things have been diagnosed in the past, because it's been seen from an external point of view. Like as the work's being done on SPECT studies with the brain and how the brain operates, they're going to be able to say what these all are is they're different brain processes. And instead of them all being separate and diverse, it's kind of actually, I kind of see it as like, if you've ever seen those audio boards where there's like little flickering lights going up and down, everyone's going to have a different profile. Maybe there's 20 different data points, and it's going to be able to, through a brain scan or who knows what it's going to be, it's going to be able to say, hey, you're 8 points out of 10 dyslexia. We need to focus on that. You're only 4 out of 10 on this type of ADHD. Maybe autistic, you're 2 out of 10, so this won't be too impactful. And maybe you're a 0 somewhere and a 10 somewhere else. But that's going to allow people to actually understand their makeup, because the other thing that I'm seeing, and you may see this as well, is I sometimes see dyslexia as a gateway neurodiversity, to some people, where they only, and I experienced this myself. I got diagnosed at 10. They missed ADHD till I was 33, and it's the same, and it goes the other way around. Sometimes you get diagnosed with ADHD, but you're better at hiding dyslexia. And so what's happening is these people are being actually, in essence, in my opinion, not misdiagnosed, but if you're only treating part of the challenge, you're missing this whole gap that causes other issues and societal issues, relationship issues. Like I've seen it in breakups and relationships and in work. And crazy, right?
Absolutely. There is, and an increasing number of Kiwis, Stephen, are Maori. The Maori population is increasing much more quickly than the European population. And our education system, for example, penalizes, doesn't do well and discriminates against Maori in a number of ways. One, of course, they're less likely to be able to afford a diagnosis in the first place. Secondly, our education system is very much focused on reading and writing, where Maori are often, because of their background, are strong orally and orally. And our education system doesn't take much account for that. That's understandable from a generation ago, because there wasn't the only way you could capture Johnny or Manu's competency was if he wrote about it. That's why we've had written exams. But now the technology exists for anyone to demonstrate their competency orally, because you've got the technology that can actually capture a sound file. And if Mr. Moderator man comes along and says, wow, you prove that you can do that, you just whip out the sound file and there's Johnny or Mary or Manu or whoever talking about it. It always seemed funny to me that in the trades, for example, sometimes you had to prove your competency about a practical task by writing about it. Does that not seem a little bit dumb to you? And so we now have the technology to capture competency in a range of different ways. I don't know how familiar you are with the universal design for learning principles. Very central.
Open to hearing about it, mate. Open to hearing.
It's an exciting new way of thinking about learning. So the 3 design principles, basically, I'm just paraphrasing. The first one is there should be multiple ways of engaging with learning. Because it used to be, you've got to rock up to an institution, a school, a university, a polytechnic, bricks and mortar out there. And of course, now you can access learning on the back of the ute, out on the farm or in the woolshed or in the kitchen or on the building site. Secondly, there should be multiple ways of engaging with the learning, not just getting to the institution, but engaging with learning. And lastly, there should be multiple ways of demonstrating your competency, not just by writing about it, by other ways instead. this is a game changer for the people that think differently. Makes a really big difference in their world.
I agree.
As education institutions slowly move away from the idea of you've got to come along to this classroom on day X and it happened. And to be fair, COVID, I think, potentially was a bit of a positive feature in this area. I think our universities are still, and there's a lot of value in people getting together on a campus. Make no bones about that. But we need to think multidimensionally, not just single dimension in this space. So
I agree.
learning can take place in many ways.
And I think it's true. Like COVID kind of got shot for being negative to society in certain ways. But again, like I think with everything, there is no such thing as only negative. I think it's such a, going back to your initial points on mindset for dyslexics, is you can choose to look at the negative in everything. And I see this a lot in ADHD, is you can sometimes be drawn into the negative because the negative creates friction and friction creates dopamine. And this is a real big point I've learned over the years, is that when I start to fight the system for the sake of fighting the system, it's actually my brain going, I'm trying to stimulate you and get you interested in the world. Because if everything's too easy, it gets boring. And it's kind of why it's why you see self-sabotage in ADHD, especially so often, is the self-sabotaging point is friction and dopamine. And so, when you give yourself a new imperative and you say, why can I look at the positive in everything? Because there is always positive. It's like COVID. It drove this type of thing. You saw it in wars as well. Like wars are terrible. There's very little good, but it also drove women to be able to work and to be able to contribute more than they've ever done in the world. And men built up respect for women in the war effort massively. It also helped with technology that came in. Yeah, like it was massive. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying let's go to war for these things, but, we all have this choice, guys, about how we look at the world. And it's the same with AI. You can look at AI and say, this is going to take my job and I've got no hope. Or you can say, this is going to make me the $6 million man. It's going to X my ability, and I'm going to take the time to watch videos on this topic. Like I created a course for Dyslexics on how to use ChatGPT. It's $7. I've made it so cost effective because I know it's going to change lives. Is that, people who have done it have said, well, I wasn't using it because I was scared, but now I can't get off the thing. I'm not sure if that's a bonus, but it's helping them in life. And I think this is the thing, what you said well, Mike, is that we're in this position where, I think industries are realizing that dyslexia exists out there. They're not sure how to do it. They're slow movers. But at least, do you feel like they're starting to move?
I think they are. I think that the government and government agencies are showing a distinct lack of leadership in this space. I think that corporates are slowly seeing, well, actually, there is a value proposition here to actually understand the full range of skills and talents of their workplace, understand that actually while Johnny or Mary may be reluctant to answer the phone because they can't take a message or whatever, all sorts of things, because people with dyslexia often hide in the shadows in the workplace because they don't want anyone to discover that they've got this what they see as an embarrassing thing. And once again, that goes back to mindset. If only we could change the language around dyslexia. It's not I hate this disability lens about dyslexia. And I know the word dyslexia has got, the Latin origin is difficulty with words, but I like to preach the whole, it's a difference, not a disability. Even the government agencies have got this social definition of dyslexia where they say, oh no, it's not it's only because society makes it a disability. Well, that's very cute, but that ignores the positive side of dyslexia. And I think as a society, we need to be more aware of the positive side of dyslexia. So I really wanted to talk, if I could, Stephen, about the wider context around dyslexia and neurodiversity generally.
Yeah, dive in, Mike. Dive in, buddy. I'm all ears. I'm interested.
So the UK is one of the leading places around dyslexia. They have an act of parliament called the Equality Act, whereby they've actually given dyslexia some legislative status. And in the workplace in the United Kingdom, if Johnny or Mary has a diagnosis of dyslexia, their bosses is required to provide them with a dyslexia-friendly working environment. Now, that makes a really big difference for people with dyslexia. And I mean, in the UK, because dyslexia has been recognised legally and legislatively, there's a different culture over there. There's a dyslexia industry there of different people working in the dyslexia space. Whereas you compare this to New Zealand, we're largely ignorant in this space. Now, the you and I's of this world, we understand it. People with dyslexia understand it if they're lucky enough to have been diagnosed, not so much those that haven't. But government agencies don't talk about it. They don't make allowances for it. They don't have any procedures covering it. Our statistics department gathers no data on it. Our human rights legislation and activity is largely silent around it. And so it goes on. And so a big step forward in New Zealand would be if we actually had something that recognised it's a thing. Now, for example, right now, no government agency or no official working in a government agency will send an email out without having at the bottom of it, my preferred pronouns are whatever, whatever. Now, that's wonderful for the transgender community in New Zealand. However, they make up about 5% of New Zealand. Dyslexic people, 10 plus 15%. Yep. They've got no recognition inside government agencies. Sadly, as a country, we don't know what we don't know, and it's costing us educationally, because people with dyslexia sadly still drop out of school. It's costing us in the corrections department, of course, because 50% of prison inmates show up as positive for dyslexia. It's costing us in mental health. And most importantly, it's costing us in productivity. And so my little mission in life at the moment is to persuade political parties, for example, to actually have policies around it. Now, I would have thought that, I mean, we're talking in New Zealand, even if you say a nice round figure, 10% of people with dyslexia, that's 350,000 voters. When you add their families and loved ones as well, that's another big group of people that are largely unrepresented in policies and in thinking of political parties. And I don't think as a nation we can afford to ignore such a large group of people, especially when that ignorance is associated with a whole lot of shame and embarrassment because they think they're thick and stupid and they're not. And I think that's the sad thing. As a country, we need to do something about it.
I'm with you there, Mike. And I think as well for our international listeners, like this is the same in the US. The US really don't recognize this as not enough. You know, I always remember interviewing the Miss South Dakota 6 years ago. And I think it was only 2018 or 2019 that South Dakota as a state even recognized dyslexia's existence. And this is 2019. It's like that should break all our brains, right? It should break all of our brains. But like I definitely see this in New Zealand, and like we see this with the current political parties, you know, are kind of like they keep shifting. I don't know if we see this, or we probably see this around the world, is they keep shifting the goalposts. Like one of them will change something, the next one will change something back. They don't actually ever get anywhere new. They don't actually really take a step forward. Like, I'd love to know your opinion, Mike. You've seen what National are looking to do at the moment. Get out of this kind of 60-person classroom for kids and go back to the more of the 30-person classroom, or I think it was 90 to 30, something like that. You know, we've got a young one that's in the first school in New Zealand that was actually dedicatedly built for the 90-person classroom. And in my opinion, it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. Like it's done really well. It's built fantastically. They look after the kids well, but I know a lot of other schools are struggling because they've been retrofitted to kind of go backwards, and now they're trying to retrofit them back again. You know, from your opinion on neurodivergent thinkers, have you got any opinion on how that side of thing is working, or do you kind of see this as the same thing? They're moving the goalposts, but nothing's changing. You know, what are your thoughts on standardizing?
Well, certainly the consensus of opinion seems to be, and I would strongly support it, that the big classrooms can be detrimental for a lot of young people with neurodiverse conditions because, of course, they're likely to be much more easily distracted, and a classroom of 90 is going to be, there's many, many more sources potentially of distraction. Excuse me. In terms of other things that are happening in the education world, the Minister of Education in New Zealand has been persuaded that actually, well, first of all, she's implemented the structured literacy program in New Zealand. That's a good thing. And I've just come back from a trip around the world, and generally speaking, around the world, they would say that's a very good thing. However, it's not the solution for children with dyslexia. It make things better, but it's not the solution. You need more and different for children with dyslexia. But it's there's some international tensions, for want of a better word, around dyslexia. You may have heard of the reading wars. There are slightly now the dyslexia wars, which aren't helping. So the states where the International Dyslexia Association exists, their mantra is around dyslexia until every child can read. And they see that as primarily a reading literacy issue. Now, the UK and the British Dyslexia Association and the European Dyslexia Association, they see dyslexia more as a lifelong thing, and also as a more of a holistic thing with pluses as well as negatives. So that's a whole thing that's going on. Can I just talk a little bit more internationally?
Please
so
do, but
Singapore, for example, has from a population of about 6 million people, round terms, they've got 14 purpose-built dyslexia centres, part of the Dyslexia Association of Singapore, with 250 fully trained dyslexia experts to deliver support for dyslexic learners in Singapore. And guess what? Singapore has got the highest PISA ratings in the OECD countries. For those that don't know what the PISA ratings are, that's the ratings of children's literacy levels. So they're doing a wonderful job. Ironically, Lee Kuan Yew, the founding prime minister of Singapore, discovered quite late in life that he had dyslexia himself, only when his own children had it. He's one of those people that we call was a high functioning dyslexic person.
yes.
Now,
And there's
in
a
Ireland,
lot of
for
there's
example,
a lot of those. There's a lot of those out there, right? There's a lot of
there
often.
are a lot of them out there. And so sometimes their dyslexia is masked, sort of not deliberately masked, but masked by the high intelligence. So we're talking about the Bill Gateses of this world and the Steve Jobs of this world.
Donald Trump.
Yeah. And in a New Zealand context, Richard Taylor of Weta Workshops, and if there's anyone out there who's a petrol head, of course, John Britton of the Britton Motorcycle. All of these people, well-known dyslexic people. But if you take Ireland, for example, their government funds a dyslexia association there and funds a lot of professionals in that space. They do similar things in Scotland. They've got a heavy dyslexia presence there, and right around the rest of the world, varying degrees, they've got government support for a dyslexia association that actually can focus and become a specialist organisation in this area.
Yeah.
So that can make a really big difference.
It really does, and I think this is the key, is that hopefully, like my real hope is that AI is going to help expand this. Like if we think about it like this, if AI can at some point, and I've considered trying to create this, but I'm sure a million people are doing this as well, is better screening tools through AI is coming. You know, I've seen it's being built for the last 10 years in different facets. That's gonna, the minute they can actually get something that's pretty consistent, roll it out across all the schools. It's a no-brainer, right? That'll solve so much. Run an AI screening test. You'll know the percentage of kids in school with dyslexia, and you're away, right? And again, the same thing with tutors. You know, you could easily create an AI dyslexic tutor over the next 5 years that's going to be as good as any teacher, that's going to be able to sit on a kid's phone and the kid can work with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think this is going to be where the game changer is for kids.
I would agree with you completely.
And your point there, Mike, around the schools, like 100% is great about that structured literacy. I don't know enough about that, but it's really interesting, like the bigger classrooms versus the smaller stuff. You know, just touching on this because it's really close to my heart at the moment. Which side's my heart? One of these sides. It's I look at it and like I've watched the bigger classrooms and the smaller classrooms. It's really interesting. I think it's the best solution to mix, because the grand scheme of the smaller classrooms is you go into them and they look like a bunch of hamsters copying off of boards. That's my fear, is that we go back to this kind of structured copy repeat kind of format. And I really hope that's not what happens, because the group learning, what I see in our young one is I don't know if it's as good for literacy. I really don't know. I really am not sure. But the other soft skills that come from it, the much more inclusive nature, they're doing a lot more creative thinking in these bigger classrooms. There's a lot more breakout rooms for coding, for music, do you know what I mean? There's a lot more hands-on experiencing that's built into these situations. And so I don't know if she's going to come out with the best literacy in the world. I really don't know, but she's learning a heap of stuff that's really powerful in a world where I actually don't think literacy is going to be the big thing in 10 years. AI can do it all. Like literacy is actually going to be less important. I personally believe
that is very, very true. That is very, very true. You're just going to need to have the tools to access it via AI or whatever. The risk that we need to fight against is that before kids get to that stage, they get sidelined from it. And you mentioned before about a screening tools, and screening tools are amazing. Even if you did nothing else, if at the end of that, the child knew that they had dyslexia, not that they were thick and stupid. Because in my world, it's very empowering to say to somebody, you have dyslexia. And by the way, there's a suite of things over here that you're likely to struggle with. But over here, there's another list of things you're likely to be very good at. And that's very empowering for someone, especially who've then gone through a stage of thinking, oh no, I'm struggling to do what the other kid next to me can do easily. And once you get around that, then that's a big step forward. And if AI can help with that, I'm all for it.
And if you were, as we come to a close, if you were going to say something to the governments of the world, the US, the UK, all of them, New Zealand included, and you say a politician was listening, what would you want to say to them? What would you want them to hear?
Well, I would like them to think that you can't solve multifaceted issues by pulling one lever. Because in New Zealand, for example, they've said, well, we're going to solve the literacy problem. We'll pull the one lever, which is the structured literacy program, and assume that everything else will be okay. So don't just pull one lever to solve a complex problem. I think that identification is paramount. There's a saying in the world that before you know how to deliver education, you've got to know what the needs are. And one of the needs is to understand the brains of the children that you're trying to educate. So a screening tool is, I think, paramount. You've got to remember, though, that perfect is the enemy of the good. By that, I mean the perfect solution would be a full-blown, expensive diagnosis. But that's economically out of the question. A screening tool that could be in the future will be likely AI operated will give you sufficient information for educators to make decisions and to respond to the needs of children. So a screening tool would be very, very useful. But at least encourage government agencies to be aware of it. It's something that exists. Don't hide it in the shadows. We need to address it rather than pretending it's not there.
Mate, I love it, Mike. And if people want to find out more about your work, I know you've got a few books out and around. How can they find out more about your amazing work?
Well, my website is www.dyslexia-consulting.com. That's where most of the stuff is sort of deposited there. mike.stiles@dyslexia-consulting.com is my email address.
You're a star, Mike, and we'll pop that in the show notes for everybody if you want to have a look at Mike's work. Thank you so much for being on the show, mate. I really appreciate your time today.
Love being here, so thank you, Stephen. You're doing some amazing work. All strength to your elbow, my friend.
Thanks.
Go well.
Cheers, buddy.
Cheers.